Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and Modern Masters 2017, the full set has been spoiled, so you know what that means. It's time to talk about all of these cards with our full set review. Today we're going to look at the white cards as well as the Azorius multicolor cards and the Esper multicolor cards. We'll also look at a handful of artifacts and lands at the end of the video. We got a lot to talk about. I want to get started pretty quick. But real fast, if you check out the description below, you'll find a couple ways to help support the channel, one of which is our Amazon affiliate store. If you make any purchases through any of the links you'll find there, a small percentage will come back to help support the channel. Really goes a long way. Thank you to everyone who's done that, especially all the folks who pre-ordered their Modern Masters booster boxes through those links. That helps more than I can really tell you. Secondly, you'll find links to Patreon down there, and check out our Patreon page to see our latest goals, our rewards, and how you can help us out there, and perhaps even get one of our exclusive angel tokens that goes along real nice with Entreat the Angels. So, having said all of that, let's get into the cards. First thing I want to talk about before we look at individual cards are the archetypes. The set is designed for you to focus on allied colored archetypes and the shards from Shards of Alara. Not to say that you couldn't go with an enemy color deck in draft, or you couldn't go with a wedge or anything like that, because the color fixing's there. And quite honestly, you probably could quite easily at times go for a 4-color deck or even 5-color good stuff in this particular set, which is a lot of fun to try to do sometimes. But really the design space was built around the concept of your allied colors and shards. So they're going to look like this. Basically, white and blue, the focus there is blink. So you're going to see a lot of blink spells and a lot of enters the battlefield effects. Blue-black is instant control. That's your real, more hardcore control colors. Black-red has an unearth mechanic and sacrifice abilities going on. If you remember unearth, I mean, we'll look at it a little bit later in the week, but basically it's an ability that allows you to take a creature that was in your graveyard, bring it back into play with haste for the turn, then you had to exile at the end of turn. But they also use sacrifice effects so that you can get additional value when you go ahead and trigger the unearth. Also, we have red-green, which is a token go-wide strategy, but it's a little bit stompy too, with some trample effects and stuff like that. And then we have green-white, which is really kind of all in on populate, which, again, is another go-wide concept with a lot of tokens, but for the most part, you'll find smaller tokens there. And as far as the shards go, Esper colors are all about control. They dabble with some creatures, especially some flyers, to get their damage across, but they are a little more kind of hard control. Grixis is all about graveyard manipulation. You will actually find a couple cards at uncommon that do allow you to bring creatures from the graveyard directly back into play. We'll see those later in the week. Jund is the next one, and that's all about sacrifice effects and just gaining incremental advantage as you sacrifice your own creatures. Naya has token aggro, so basically what you saw from, you can kind of expect you have a populate style deck going on, but just the extra aggro that's coming in by adding the red. And then finally, Bant is all about the splicers. Now, we'll see a lot of the splicers today, because actually most of them are in white. However, there are some, at least one in blue and one in green, and there's some good support cards in those colors as well. Now, today's set review is actually going to be more of a limited focus set review. As far as the cards themselves go, I mean, we kind of know where they fit in Constructed, right? For the most part, we know what cards get played in Modern and which decks they're in. Same goes for Commander and so on and so forth. But today we're going to look at each individual card, focus in on which strategy maybe it works best in these limited archetypes, and then kind of talk about just overall how good the card is. Is it something you want to draft highly? Is it something you want to leave in your sideboard? Is it a good card for different archetypes? That type of thing. So having said all that, let's get into the individual cards. We're going to start off with Attended Knight. And this is a perfect example of a card that's going to walk the line between different archetypes. You're going to see a whole lot of this as we go through the cards this week. They did a fantastic job of finding a card that works really good to use a blink spell on for white-blue. Or, you know what? This is also great in white-green because of the populate mechanic. You're getting yourself a 1/1 white soldier creature token when this enters the battlefield, which later can be populated. And you know what? On its own, this is actually a fantastic card. Like, if you forget about blink and forget about populate for just a second, and you think, for 3 mana, I'm going to play a 2/2 for a striker and also get a 1/1, so 3/3 power and toughness on the board for 3, 2 of which for a strike. Yeah, you know what? Sign me up. I'm happy to play that creature all day long. You'll find this at common, so it won't be hard to pick up 1 or 2 of these if you need them. Really, really strong creature, actually. Next, we have Banishing Stroke, and this doesn't fit into any particular archetype necessarily, but it is a very good instant, and it's also one of the miracle cards. So there's a potential chance that you can play this real cheap if you happen to draw it. I will say, if you haven't played with miracles before, because it's been a while since Have Us and Restored, do remember when you draw your cards to not just put them right into your hand, because if you do have a miracle in your deck, you do need to show that before it touches the other cards in your hand. That could get kind of awkward. So you want to get yourself in that habit and start thinking about that. But aside from all that, Banishing Stroke itself is just a really good removal spell, and it deals with artifact, creature, or enchantment that you need to deal with. It also puts it at the bottom of its owner's library, so you don't have to worry about like anything going on with black and its shenanigans to bring the card back into play from the graveyard, or there's a lot of cards that take cards from the graveyard back to your hand. So you don't want your opponent to get that incremental advantage. This will put it on the bottom of the library, just kind of takes care of that situation, which is phenomenal. I mean, you could also use this on your own stuff if you needed to in kind of an obscure situation, but just kind of remember that's an option too. Blade Splicer. All right, well, here's the first Splicer of the day, and you're going to find that, at least in white, we have a rare, we have an uncommon, and we have a common. You'll find uncommon Splicers in other colors. We'll look at those later in the week. Like I mentioned earlier, they're in Bant colors, so you could go with a Bant Splicer theme. But just on their own, I mean, this card fits really well into both the white-blue Blink theme as well as the green-white Populate theme. So they did a good job at finding a card that crosses over again. Aside from that, another card that's just really strong on paper. I mean, a white and 2, and you're getting yourself 4/4 power and toughness on the board. 3 of that's going to be first strike as long as this 1/1 stays alive. That's phenomenal. Not to mention, if you populate, now you could have 2 3/3 first strikers on the battlefield. That gets kind of crazy kind of quick, right? So this is phenomenal. Now here's the deal. When you go into a draft, maybe you open this up pack 1, it's your rare. If you pick it up early in the draft, then you can try to pick up all the other support cards, the other Splicers that other folks may pass, so on and so forth, some of the Blink cards. But if this comes late, it might be a little awkward because you might have passed a lot of really good cards that coincide with this, and all of a sudden it is kind of a dud at that point for you. So if you get this early, though, you can do some crazy things. Entreat the Angels. All right, this is one of the mythics, and okay, the first thing I'll say about this card, it doesn't really fit into the Blink archetype. Maybe it kind of fits into Populate because you're getting yourself a 4/4 Angel token, or hopefully multiple ones. But it's an awesome, awesome card. Doesn't matter what archetype you're in. You're going to want to play this. As long as you can swing the casting cost, go for it. Basically, if you can miracle this, it's huge. Even if you miracle this early in the game, like let's say you miracle it like on turn 4, you still get yourself a 4/4 flyer on turn 4. That's actually pretty good. And even if you don't miracle it in the mid to late game, this thing is still really strong to have. Even if you give yourself just a couple tokens, again, it works great with Populate. Phenomenal card. You'll be happy to run it. It's really powerful. You won't see it a whole lot in Limited, but when you do, it's going to be awesome. Eyes in the Sky. Well, here's one of our first Populate cards now. And this one's okay on its own. I mean, it's a lot better if you have good targets to populate, right? Let's look at it by itself first. I pay 4 and I get myself a 1/1 white bird creature with flying, and then I can populate, so I actually get 2. For 4 mana, that's okay. Like, that's fine. But in this set, there's such a high power level. There's actually probably a lot better stuff I could do for 4 mana. So I'm probably not running that in that situation. However, if I have a lot of good targets for this in my deck, like we just saw Blade Splicer, for example, if I have good targets, then I feel a lot better about running this. Then worst case scenario, it's 2 1/1 flyers for 4, which is, okay. But best case scenario, it could be something a lot better under the right circumstances. I'll go ahead and take the risk. But a lot of cases, this might end up in your sideboard, but if you are all in on Populate, this will be pretty good for you. All right, next we have Flicker Wisp. And quite honestly, this is maybe one of my favorite uncommons in the set. There's some real good uncommons in the set, but this one's phenomenal. All right, look at it this way. I'll pay 3 for a 3/1 flyer all day long. Even if I don't even read the rest of the card, this is a great card already. I'm on board. Sign me up. I'll play it. But go a little bit further. There's so much versatility here. When this enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent. Not a creature, mind you, a permanent. It doesn't have to be just yours. It can be your opponent's. And then it will re-enter the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Okay. So this does so many different things for you. I mean, it can just do the normal stuff. Like, for example, I'm going to use it to flicker maybe a really good creature with an enters the battlefield effect that I have on the board and get some sort of incremental value that way. Or maybe I can flicker one of my opponent's creatures away for the turn, attacking for some extra damage. Or maybe I can do some other fancy stuff like flicker my opponent's planeswalker that's about to ultimate, or flicker my planeswalker that has 1 loyalty counter left on it, right? Now, granted, will that kind of thing happen all the time in Limited? No, of course not. But it just goes to show you there's so much versatility here. And even if you don't have a great target for this thing, it's still a 3/1 flyer. It still can get across some fast damage. Awesome, awesome cards. You'll be happy to play it. Obviously, it totally makes sense in the blue blink strategies, but phenomenal card in general. All right, next one is Gideon's Lawkeeper. Now, this is a good 1-drop, right? Like, they don't make 1-drops like this anymore. First off, when you find these tap-down creatures nowadays, they cost more to activate, usually more to cast. This one, 1 mana, 1/1, 1 to activate, phenomenal. It's a weird situation for your opponent because they're going to be backed into a corner. At some point, they're probably going to have to use a removal spell on your 1-drop, and that's not going to feel real good. If they don't, they're going to have to deal with the fact that you're tying up their best creature for the duration of the game for just 1 mana a turn. That becomes pretty crazy pretty quick, right? So these are great defensively. It keeps your opponent's best creature off your back. They're great offensively, especially when you start to go wide. You don't want to lose too many of your tokens and such. You get to tap down one of their things and just helps you get that much more damage across over the course of a turn or two. Really, really awesome card. Also, there is a card we're going to look at a little bit later that rewards you for playing with some 1-drops and could let you even tutor this out. And that's kind of awesome too. Fantastic inclusion. You'll be happy to play this really again in whichever archetype you're in. Next, we have Graceful Reprieve. And this is a combat trick. I mean, there's nothing too exciting here. They went with this combat trick as opposed to many of the other ones they could have because the creature actually dies and comes back. So again, it plays well with enter the battlefield effects, which you'll see plenty of, especially in white. So that's fantastic if you have a good target for it in that case. But I'll be real honest with you. I mean, you only have a few spots for anything that's not a creature in Limited, right? Especially if you're in white. And there's some really great white instants and even sorceries out there that we've already seen, for example. So this isn't always going to make your cut. It's a fine combat trick. It's a little better if you're all in on the blink strategy with some good enters the battlefield effects. But many times this will probably sit in your sideboard, to be quite honest. Intangible Virtue. All right, so you kind of see what's going on here, right? A lot of populate, a lot of small creatures. I mean, even that 4 casting cost instant that gives you 2 1/1 birds, all of a sudden those become 2 2/2 birds when this is in play. That becomes a lot better, right? And this is at uncommon, so you'll be able to pick up these at least with some frequency in Limited. Not all the time, but there's a good chance you'll see this at some point in a draft, at least one of. They do stack real nicely too if you happen to get real lucky. But you know what? Here's the deal with this card. I mean, typically, I'm not a big fan of enchantments that do nothing on their own, but this one's so cheap. A 2-drop that's going to give all my tokens +1/+1 and vigilance. As long as I have tokens to target this with, I'm happy to play it. Now, sometimes you don't, right? If you don't have a lot of ways to make tokens, then you don't play it. But when you do, you'll be happy to run this. Core Hookmaster. This is actually a pretty good creature. I'm probably happy to run a 1 of in most decks of this one. If I'm in white-blue blink, I might be opened to almost certainly run it and not put it in my sideboard. Here's the deal. The only reason I'm a little hesitant to just throw it in any deck is because it is only a 2/2 for 3. I mean, the economy of that isn't super good. It does tap down one of your opponent's creatures for 2 turns. That's good. It's a nice little tempo play, but it doesn't necessarily save you if you're behind. It just slows things down a little bit. But if I can blink this, okay, it gets a little better. Now maybe I can tap something down a couple times for 2 turns. That becomes 4 turns altogether. All right, that becomes a little more playable. So again, I'm happy with a 1/0 probably in the white-blue blank. I might run this in other archetypes, but if I have better stuff, which a lot of times you probably will, could end up in the sideboard. Core Skyfisher. This is another one of those cards that I'm a little kind of hot and cold on. Again, if I'm all in on blink and I have some really good enters the battlefield effects, then I may consider running this. But even though it's a 2-drop, it is a pretty strong tempo play against you, because you kind of want to play something like this on turn 2. Like, it starts to feel a little late to the game on turn 4, right? But on turn 2, if I could get this out, wonderful. But if I do that, I'm returning something else to my hand. Now, if I have a good 1-drop, like we saw Gideon's Lawmaker, for example, then that's a good turn 1, turn 2 combo, quite honestly. You put the Lawmaker back out on turn 3, maybe with another 2-drop, and you're in business. But if that's not the case and you don't feel like you're going to be consistent, I might not necessarily run this. So again, know your deck. It's definitely runnable. Great if you have some maybe additional 1-drops in your deck, perhaps. And again, maybe a lot better if you have some real good targets that you'd like to cast twice for enter the battlefield effects. But many times, again, I think it could end up in the sideboard. Next, we have Lingering Souls, and this is maybe one of my favorite cards at Uncommon you're going to find in the set. This card is a beater. I won a lot of Innistrad limited tournaments back in the day with this card. It looks a little innocuous, but it does serious work. Okay, here's the deal. Turn 3, potentially you could get yourself 2 1/1 flyers. Turn 4, potentially you could have 4 1/1 flyers. And if you happen to have a couple copies of this in your deck, that could be phenomenal for you, right? And, you know, a few minutes ago I was talking about the Populate card where I kind of said, well, a white and 3, and if I don't have any other good targets, getting 2 1/1 flying birds doesn't feel super exciting to me. But there's a big difference between that card and this card, and that's the 1 mana, quite honestly. The fact that I can play this on turn 3 as opposed to turn 4 makes a really big difference. And also the fact that I can flashback it on turn 4 and play it again makes a really huge difference. 4 1/1 flyers at that point in the game can sometimes be game-winning and overwhelming, especially if you can do something to enhance those flyers, or maybe you're just simply playing with some Populate strategies and you can make more of them that way. This card is phenomenal. Even if you're not in Populate, but you're in white, play this card, and make sure you splash the black. Like I said, you're going to want to be able to flash it back to really make this card worthwhile. But if you can, it's going to do serious work for you. Linvala, Keeper of Silence. This is another one of the mythics we'll look at today, and this is fantastic for you in Limited if you are lucky enough to open the card. I mean, first off, it's a pretty pricey card. At the time it was announced, it was going for about $40. It's coming down a little bit now, so that's a good thing. But it's a phenomenal commander card, and that's where a lot of the attention is with this card. But if you happen to get it, I mean, a 3/4 flyer for 4, and oh, by the way, activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can be activated. Phenomenal. Maybe that part won't always play a big role, but it will enough of the time for you to be real happy with her, for sure. Phenomenal card. And I know you won't see it a lot in Limited, but if you're lucky enough to open it, you'll be happy to play it. Lone Missionary. This is another enters the battlefield effect. I mean, this one I'm not super crazy about. Here's the deal, though. It's only a 2-drop, and the 2-drop spot in your limited decks is one of the most important spots of your curve. You want to make sure that that's stacked pretty well and has the right amount of creatures in it. So there's going to be times you're going to simply run this because it's a very serviceable 2-drop, and that's okay. That's totally fine. Also, maybe you sideboard this in against super aggressive decks where that life gain might actually matter in the outcome. That's another option with this card as well. So I'm glad it's here. Won't always make your main deck, but it definitely has its role. Master Splicer. So here's another Splicer. This one's the uncommon one. And this one, again, quite good. And when you look at the mathematics behind this card, you pay 4, and you're actually getting yourself 5/5 power and toughness on the battlefield for 4 mana. That's phenomenal. And if you're able to populate those golems or blink this and get another one that way, or play another Splicer, all of a sudden the value just starts to add up, right? And like I said, the Splicers can be found in the Bant colors, so maybe you're lucky enough to be in all 3 of those colors and have some options to work with this card. Phenomenal, but it's also good in the blink strategy. It's good in the populate strategy. Really awesome card. In some ways, maybe my favorite just because of the raw power and toughness you get to put on the battlefield for 4 mana, quite honestly. Phenomenal. Next, we have Momentary Blink, and this is a little more restricted than, say, Flicker Wisp, right? This one's an instant, and you can only exile target creature you control. However, what's kind of nice about this is there are going to be times that you are going to need more ways to blink, and you have a lot of creatures with enters the battlefield effects, so you'll need these type of spells. And on top of that, you can also flashback it as long as you have the blue mana, so you can actually play it twice. definitely worthwhile. And if it ends up in your graveyard for some reason, maybe you get milled, there is a little bit of milling going on in here, you can still find value from it out of your graveyard as well. Also, it's important to remember those Esper decks out there, which are a little more hard control. Any sort of instant in those decks, including one like this, could potentially really be good for you because you're going to want to hold on to your mana, maybe hold on to some counter magic and stuff like that. And any turn that it turns out you don't need to use that counter spell at the end of your opponent's turn, then maybe you have another play like blanking a creature and getting some sort of advantage out of that. So this card is actually very good and very usable in a lot of different situations. All right, speaking of very good cards, here's one that's more than very good. Path to Exile. One of the best removal spells probably ever printed. It's awesome. I mean, exile target creature. You don't have to worry about it going to the graveyard and coming back to haunt you later. Now, yes, its controller gets to search their library for basic land and put it into play tapped, which in a pinch you could even do to yourself if you're really desperate for colors. Now, that is a downside. I mean, you do have to think about in this limited game, you're going to find people getting greedy all the time because there's so many good, powerful cards. You'll find people trying to go 4 or 5 colors, and I think most people are going to be going 3 colors. So if your opponent is stuck on a color, like this could really help them out in some situations. But you know what? You can't worry about that because the power behind this removal spell being only 1 mana and exiling the creature, you're just going to have to take that risk because this is just too good to pass up. Awesome, awesome card. Pitfall Trap. This is a fine removal spell if you don't have enough Path to Exiles. It really is fine. I mean, it's nothing to write home about. It can't deal with flying creatures. That's the most awkward part of this card. However, it can deal with a lot of big stuff on the ground, and in some cases just for 1 mana. And if it's not 1 mana, 3 mana is not too expensive for a spell like this either. Maybe you board it out if your opponent ends up playing a lot of flying creatures, maybe Esper Control, which has a lot of flying instant creatures, things like that. Then all of a sudden it's not that good anymore, but for the most part, if you need removal, it's there for you. Ranger of Eos. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, but as you know, if you have 1-drops in your deck, this is a really good card. If you don't have those 1-drops, then I'd skip it because you don't want to play a 3/2 for 4 mana if you don't have targets or enough targets for this thing. But as long as you're pretty confident that by the time you draw this card, you'll still have a couple 1-drops in your deck, go for it. I mean, this is really phenomenal value, quite honestly. We saw one really good 1-drop a few minutes ago with Gideon's Lawmaker, and there's another real good one coming up in a few moments. Restoration Angel. All right, here's kind of what I was alluding to before. If you're in those Esper Control colors, this is an awesome card for you because Esper Control is really trying to hang on to its mana, and then when it doesn't need to use its mana as a defensive ability like a counterspell, then it can take that mana and do some really good things. And in this case, Restoration Angel may be one of the best things you can do. Flashes into play as a 3/4. It's also great as a combat trick, as a surprise blocker. It also, by the way, flickers a non-angel creature card you control. So again, if you have anything that's going to benefit you with a good entries of battlefield effect, you get the extra bonus from there. This card's awesome. The versatility is phenomenal. And like I said, it works in all the archetypes. It works in Bant, Esper, White-Blue, and Green-White. No matter where you're going with this, good card, play it. You'll be happy you did. Rootborn Defenses. All right, so this is an alright populate card. You're going to pay 3. It's instant. I do like that. Lets you populate, but it's also a combat trick and gives all your creatures indestructible till end of turn. So the reason I'm playing this is if I want to make sure I have just one more populate trigger or maybe just one good combat trick in my deck. It's not always going to make the cut. Again, there's going to be a lot of competition for these instants and sorceries and such. But as long as you feel like your deck can benefit from this, it will be fine just to run a 1-of, I think. I don't really see more than that, but a 1-of I think would be acceptable in a lot of situations. Again, as long as you have targets to populate. Seance. Okay. This is an interesting one. I talked about this quite a bit when it was spoiled. Long story short, I think mainly the only reason this is here is because about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, there was somebody who was going out on like social media and encouraging people to destroy copies of this card, and they would pay them if they destroyed copies. And then they were trying to get a player to go to the Pro Tour and do well with a deck based around Seance. And it was just kind of the most blatant attempt at market manipulation that anyone would ever see, pretty much. Obviously, it didn't work because this is a 50-cent card, probably less now that it's been reprinted. But, and of course, nobody won a Pro Tour with a Seance deck. So it didn't quite get there. But I think Wizards just threw this in as almost a, hey, we're paying attention. So if you're going to try to manipulate the market, do remember that we can counter that by reprinting Seance. The sad part is now we all have to suffer and play with Seance. So the bottom line is it unplayable? No, it's not unplayable, but it's not very good. Like if you play this, it's going to cost you 4 to put into play, and then it doesn't do anything on its own. At the beginning of your next upkeep, then, if you have a creature card in your graveyard, you can exile it and get a token that lasts for the duration of the turn. Yeah. There's not too much more I can say about it. Sensor Splicer. Well, this one's a little better. Now, this one, though, the least exciting of all the Splicers we've seen so far. Maybe the least exciting out of all of them in the set, quite honestly. But this is a common one. So, at common, I can kind of excuse that a little bit. So, if you're just looking for one more Splicer, this is fine. Even 2 of in a really strong, like, Splicer-centric band deck would probably be fine, right? But the reason I'm not as hot on this one is because I'm paying 5 mana. I am getting 4/4 power toughness on the board, and the golems are getting vigilance this time. That's okay, but it's not quite as good as the others we've seen. Soul Warden, here's that other 1-drop I was alluding to earlier. Great 1-drop. Maybe not for every deck, but this is going to be even better in the populate decks, right? Because you're hopefully going to be making a lot of tokens quite frequently, building your life on top of it, and actually could get out of control pretty quick in the right build. Other decks, maybe you don't have as many creatures, like Esper Control, for example. This probably isn't very good in that deck because you're going to be playing less creatures and more spells like Sorceries and Instants. But it's there for decks that are going to want to use it with Populate, or if you're maybe lucky enough to get a Ranger of Eos, for example, it could be really good there. Also, maybe it's a good sideboard card, if nothing else, if you go up against a very aggressive deck that's doing a lot of damage early on, or some of those black or black-red decks that are pinging you and draining you for life slowly. This kind of helps offset that a little bit. Stony Silence. Basically a sideboard card to bring in to hose artifacts, and mostly, I mean, there's not a whole lot of artifacts in this set, but we do have the Signets, which we'll look at least a couple of them a little bit later. Signets are great cards, and like I said earlier, you are going to run into people trying to get a little bit greedy, maybe go a little bit deep with their colors, and if they're relying on Signets to do it, you just sideboard this in and basically hose them. Terminus. Terminus is a great panic button. I'll say that about it. I'm a little surprised in some way. I kind of thought we were going to see Supreme Verdict, but instead they went with the Miracle cards a little heavier, so that makes sense, I think. It's great if you can happen to miracle this. I mean, there's times where you could be flat out losing the game. You draw this and pay 1 mana and just reset everything. Everything goes to the bottom of the library, so you don't have to worry about anything coming back out of graveyard, so that's kind of nice. Phenomenal cards. You know what? I would run this again in just any archetype as long as I can swing the casting cost, just because why not? If I'm behind at any point, I can maybe stabilize. Urbis Protector. On paper, like, not super exciting. Paying 6 for a 4/4 flyer and a 1/1 is okay, and I wouldn't be opposed to running one of these in the Populate deck, but you don't want more than one because you don't want to draw like 2 of these in your opening hand, right? And that could happen relatively easily in a 40 card deck sometimes. So one of it's fine, especially if you're in Populate and you know you're going to be able to recreate some of those angel tokens over time. Then it becomes a lot better. But be careful with this one. Just don't go overboard with it. Wake the Reflections. Simply, if you need another way to populate, it's there for you. There's other options that will probably be better. I mean, we've already seen other cards that populate and also do other things. This one, of course, is cheap at only 1 mana. It does have that going for it. We're going to see some more cards as we go on throughout the week, too, especially when we get to green that populate, which are pretty awesome. So you're not always going to need this. A lot of times it's just going to be extra for you and it will get to your sideboard. But if you need it, it's there for you. Youthful Knight doesn't play in particularly into any of the archetypes necessarily, but it's just a good 2-drop. I mean, it's a 2/1. It's a little fragile, but it has first strike. That goes a really long way. And like I said, we don't see quite as many like really impressive 2-drops in white. So this is maybe the best one, quite honestly. So you'll be happy to run these. All right, let's talk about a few multicolor cards. We have a few hybrid cards here. First one being Ether Toe in Azorius colors. And a couple things. First off, this has Conspire, which I was never a huge fan of Conspire because it is contingent upon board state. And I don't know, I like my cards to just be kind of powerful on their own most of the time. But if I'm in the Populate deck, there's a good chance I could Conspire this and get extra value. So all of a sudden, okay, this becomes maybe a better card in those type of situations. It is a tempo play. I mean, don't forget that. You get to put a target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. So that does a couple things for you. I mean, you can tempo your opponent a little bit if they have a creature you don't really have an answer to at that time. Or if maybe your opponent plays a combat trick and you want to save your creature, you can do that, but you're kind of tempoing yourself to do it. It's not super exciting. And like I said, there's just so much competition in this set that I don't see myself running this most of the time, quite honestly. I think there's better things, even if I'm in the Populate deck. Miss Meadow Witch. This is a 2-drop, but it's only a 1/1. It's got a nice ability. I mean, basically exile target creature, and then you return to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. And it can hit opponent's creatures, not just your creatures. So I like that versatility. But it does cost 4 to do that. It's very fragile, and it costs 2 to cast. I feel like my 2-drops, I at least want them to be 2/2s. That may be a little greedy. This isn't bad in the long game if you're finding yourself in a board stall and you have some mana to pour into this. This actually becomes pretty good. But I don't know if I'm going to run it just right off the bat. Like maybe this is a sideboard card for me that I bring in if I feel like I'm in a real grindy matchup. Alright, let's look at some gold Azorius cards with Ether Mage's Touch. Alright, this one I'm not super excited about. I won't say I would never play it. Like, I could see myself in an Esper Control build where I'm kind of like, I just need some instants that might do something decent for those turns where I don't have to counter something or I don't need to use a removal spell or something like that. And I want to do something and I find some action. The only problem is this card's a little contingent. It's on what's on the top of your deck. There's just a lot of variance here. I mean, you could completely miss with this for 4 mana, and that's not going to feel good. If you miss, then, alright, creature goes into the battlefield at the end of the turn, goes back to your hand. And what you really want to hit, hopefully, is a creature with an enters the battlefield effect. So now you're not only just looking for a creature in the top 4 cards, but you're looking for a creature with a certain effect, which is what you really need to happen probably to make this worth 4 mana most of the time. So I don't know. I don't feel great about this one, quite honestly. And like I said, it's not unplayable. Like there are certain archetypes where it makes sense, but I don't see myself doing it that often. Next we have Deputy of Acquittals, and this is actually a nice little 2-drop. 2/2 for 2, and I can flash it in. Oh, and by the way, if I want to, I can return a target creature to my hand. Don't have to. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. A lot of versatility here. First off, you can use it to protect one of your creatures against, say, a removal spell or combat trick. You can flash it in to maybe just get an extra blocker if you need one to double up against a bigger creature. Or you can just simply, if you're playing Azorius Control and you have that turn where you don't use your counter magic or what have you and you need to create some action, it has flash, put it down at the end of your opponent's turn. There you go. At least you did something that turn. It's very good. I mean, granted, it works well in white-blue flash, works well in Esper Control. Happy to run these. Alright, next we have another one of the mythics, and it's a good one. Sphinx's Revelation. This card was a force in Standard back in its day, and still sees a lot of play. Sees Modern play, sees play in a lot of formats, but this card's awesome. You're not going to see it a whole lot in Limited. It's mythic, but when you get it, if you can swing the color, play it. You're going to be real happy that you did. Because here's the deal. The life gain, that's good, and it can definitely be of consequence, especially against an aggressive deck. But the card draw ability here and the fact that you can do all this at instant speed, phenomenal. Even if you get this like mid-game and you're starting to fall behind a little bit, like you can pay 5 mana and draw 2 cards and gain 2 life, and it might just help you catch up. Or if you're lucky enough to play this later in the game and you can hold on to it for a little while, draw a lot more cards on a lot more life, do it at instant speed at the end of your opponent's turn, set up for a real big turn next time around. And again, if you're an Esper control, perfect, because it lets you kind of hold on to your counter magic and stuff. And if you don't need to use it, then you just go into this card at the end of your opponent's turn. Awesome, awesome card. If you're lucky enough to get it, and you can, just go ahead and put it in your deck and be happy you did. Talon Trooper. This doesn't play well with Esper Control necessarily or White Blue Blink just on its own. It's a 2/3 flyer for 3. Think of it this way though. 2 different color mana. Even though mana is very, very forgiving in this set, there's a good chance that you might not always be able to play this on turn 3, and that's okay. It's just a good card. I mean, 2/3 flyer for 3, even with 2 different colors, I'm real happy to play. And it will be nice probably in those Esper Control decks just to be able to get down early, start controlling the game, and then have a way to at least peck your opponent down for a couple damage every turn, and it will do a fair amount of work probably in a build like that. But again, I'd be happy to run it as long as I can swing the colors probably in any archetype. Vanish into Memory. Here's another instant card, and it's another thing you can do in Esper Control if you're just looking for an instant. I'm not super crazy about it. I mean, you exile a target creature. It doesn't have to be your own creature. It can be an opponent's creature. You draw cards equal to their power, and then at the beginning of the next upkeep, the creature comes back and you have to discard based on their toughness. Obviously, it's better if the creature has low toughness and higher power, or if you think you can dump your hand real quick. But it is 4 mana, and again, you do have that level of variance attached to it because it depends on what's on the board. What kind of creatures are on the board? What cards do you draw? Are you going to be able to use them fast enough before the creature comes back? There's just a lot of variance here that I'm not super comfortable with, quite honestly. Again, it's an instant if I'm really desperate in Esper Control for another instant, but I could see myself running a lot of other stuff before this. Next, we have Wall of Denial, and this is more of a sideboard card for me, depending on the matchup. It's great probably in Esper Control, though. I could see main decking it in that deck just to slow things down, let you build up enough cards and land so you can play your counter magic and such. But it is a good defender. If you're in a situation where you're dealing with flyers and you don't have great ways to stop them quickly, then you'll sideboard this in, you'll be happy to have it. It has Shroud, which is a nice bonus to it, but keep in mind it is Shroud and not hexproof, so you can't enchant it either. It's real easy to kind of make that mistake when you're used to playing a lot of hexproof. But yeah, it kind of is what it is. Slows down the game, gums up things. If you're in an aggressive deck, you're probably not really wanting to use something like this. But if you're in a more controlling, methodical deck, it'll be just fine. All right, let's look at some Orzhov cards. Now, you will notice the way they've set up the set, you're going to see a lot of the allied colors, not a lot of the enemy colors, but we do have a few. And first off, we have Gift of Orzhova. Now, here's the deal. This one's a hybrid card, which is kind of nice. I'm not a big fan of auras typically. I don't want to be 2 for 1. So I have a hard time saying, yeah, run this in your deck and have a great day and be happy about it. Not to say I wouldn't run this card sometimes, but I'd be a little hesitant about it at the very least. I want to make sure I don't have better things. Here's the deal. The payoff's great. If you can put this on a creature, +1/+1, flying lifelink, attack in, get some pretty significant life swing there, it's awesome. It's a high risk, high reward card. But what I don't want to happen is I put this on my creature, I attack in, and it gets destroyed. That's not going to feel good at all, especially if it gets destroyed by 1 casting cost spell or something like that, right? So here's the deal. I wouldn't say never run these, but be careful. I mean, this is no more than a 1 of typically if you are deciding to run it. If you really don't have anything better to do necessarily in your colors, it's fine. And you could actually find a lot of success with it at times, especially if your opponent doesn't have a lot of answers. And I wouldn't be opposed to sideboarding this in if I don't see a lot of removal from my opponent in game 1 either. All of a sudden, I feel like the odds of this backfiring on me, if I feel like they're a little worse, then okay, maybe I'll throw it in my deck. But I don't want to run more than 1 of something like this, unless I'm playing with one of the cards that we're going to look at in a few minutes. All right, next we have Agent of Masks, and I don't know, I'm not real big on this one. Here's the deal for me. It's a 2/3 for 5. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 1 life. That's probably a lot better in Commander, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. But in a one-on-one situation, you're just pinging someone for 1 and gaining 1 life a turn on your turn. And it's only a 2/3 and you paid 5 for it. It just feels overcosted in that situation. Maybe a lot better in a multiplayer game, but in this situation, I'm not excited about it. There are other ways to kind of ping people down and drain their life slowly, especially in red, black. And you see a lot of the drain life stuff going on in black, obviously. And that's fine if you're using this in conjunction with some of those other cards, maybe. But I don't know. I just can't get there, quite honestly. I mean, on one hand, you feel like, well, if they use a removal spell on this, well, they used it on a 2/3 creature instead of something bigger and better. But it's a 2/3 creature you paid 5 for. And I mean, would you feel like you're getting 1 over your opponent if they used it on your Sarah Angel, right? Like, so it's kind of the same idea. You play a 5 casting cost spell, your opponent destroys it. But at least in that situation, you tried for a Sarah Angel as opposed to a 2/3. So I don't know. Like, I don't feel great about this one most of the time. Obsidian Ghost Council. Now, here's one I do feel great about. This card is a beating. Phenomenal card. And this was actually a mythic. It got the downgrade to rare. So you know the power levels there, right? And I played with this and against this in limited. And I'll tell you, I love playing with it. I hate playing against it. It can be so frustrating. First off, for 5 mana, and granted, 2 different colors, but still, 5 mana for a 5/5, and when it enters the battlefield, it drains 2 life. And then on your end step, you have the option, if you want to, you can exile it, and then it comes back on your next turn, does it again, and it has haste when it comes back, so you can still attack with it. So here's the thing. If your opponent doesn't have instant speed removal, they can't do anything about this. They're just letting you drain 2 life a turn and letting you have a 5/5 on your turn. And even if the board state's completely gummed up and you can't attack with the 5/5, you're still draining them for 2 life every turn. And until they pull an instant removal spell, they can't do anything about it. This card's awesome. Play it if you can. It's phenomenal. You'll be happy that you did. Next we have Sin Collector, and this is actually a really cool card, even in limited. Now, it's only 2/1, it costs 3, it's 2 different colors, but here's what I like about it. You get to look at your opponent's hand. Now, if you hit an instant or sorcery and exile it, wonderful. There's a lot of times that might not happen in limited. I mean, it's probably a lot more likely for that to happen in constructed. There's times you might look at your opponent's hand, they just got creatures and lands, you don't get any benefit from it, but you know what's in their hand, and that actually does go a long way. And I'm more than happy to play that just for that ability alone. Because a lot of times you have a removal spell in your hand and you're thinking to yourself, should I use it on this creature or should I wait for something better to come along? Well, if you know that they do or don't have something better, at least at that time, it helps you make better decisions. Really good card. Run it. You'll be happy with it. Tower Gargoyle. This is the first Esper card out of a couple of them here, and not a lot for me to say about it. I mean, it's just a little 4/4 flyer for 4. Granted, it's 3 different colors, which can be a little annoying, but again, I don't think that's a huge deal necessarily in this particular limited environment, and this is perfect for that kind of deck. You can get this creature down when you get a chance. It's pretty economical at 4 mana, and then this is going to get in hopefully for some damage while you control the rest of the game. Next we have Zur the Enchanter, and this is a very popular Commander card. If you're familiar with Commander, you know this card quite well. You probably played with it or against it many times. I've played with this as my Commander before, and you kind of know just what this can do if left out of check, right? And here's the deal. If you happen to play with Zur in Limited, you got my blessing. Throw in a couple of those enchantments. Go for it. You can do it, and I won't be mad at you. The thing is, at that point, if you have Zur, I mean, don't go crazy. If you put too many in, then obviously you could be in a weird situation where you keep drawing enchantments and you can't get your creatures. So don't go overboard, but it does at least take a lot of the risk out of those aura enchantments at the very least, if nothing else. You attack with Zur, and even if he's destroyed or whatever creature you're putting the aura on is destroyed, or even if the enchantment gets disenchanted before it does anything or anything like that, at the very least, it's still more like a 1-for-1 because it's not a card that you played out of your hand and it's not a card you paid for, right? So if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't happen, you're probably in a real good place because if your opponent doesn't have an answer for this, you're going to start to run away with the game. So it's a real cool inclusion. I'm glad they put it in the set, and it's something that you can maybe do a light draft around, at least to some degree, and it's actually pretty interesting. All right, next we have Azorius Signet, and this is the first Signet. All 10 of them are in the set, and they have their more updated art from when they were originally printed in the first Ravnica. They've updated the art over the years as they put these things into Commander products and such. But these cards, I'll tell you right now, these are actually very, very powerful. If you ever played Cube with signets in them, you know what I'm talking about here. Like, these sometimes are first pickable. Like, if you find an on-color signet in pack 3, a lot of times it's worth taking it, quite honestly. These are great. They smooth out your mana. They smooth out your curve. They give you some options that are not land options to get yourself some extra mana as time goes on, and fix colors. Really, really awesome stuff here. Don't underestimate these. Don't expect them to wheel either, because they won't wheel. People will pick these things up. They'll even pick up off-color ones and be happy to do so. And let's face it, there's a lot of reasons to go deep with colors in this limited environment. These help you do it. They're at uncommon, so they'll be around at least a fair amount of the time when you open your packs. Keep an eye out. Don't overlook these. They're awesome. Basilisk Collar. It's a great card for limited. I mean, fantastic piece of equipment. You could use this in any archetype. It's real simple. It's cheap. It's great with pingers. There's at least one card. There's a red card we're going to look at in a few days that pings. You attach this to it, and it's pinging with Death Touch. That's always a good time. Fantastic card. You'll be happy to play it. I mean, it fits into most decks, quite honestly, and there's a lot of value to be had here. Dampening Matrix. This one's interesting. Like, this is a sideboard card, maybe. Activated abilities of artifacts and creatures can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So, I don't know. It's a little awkward at times because it affects you as much as it affects your opponent. So don't forget that. It is a symmetrical effect. Because of that, you're only going to bring it in if you feel like it's really going to hose your opponent a lot more than it's going to hose you. And there will be situations where you might be in a matchup where that makes sense. And if it is, wonderful, throw it in there. But most of the time, it's probably not going to be great and limited. Gravedigger's Cage, a great card for constructed play, and a really awesome sideboard card. And it's actually a really good sideboard card here too, because again, those black-red decks, especially when you look at black, just in general, there is a graveyard theme there. Grixis Graveyard is definitely a thing. So there's cards that we're going to see over the next couple days, especially in black, that can bring cards out of the graveyard to the battlefield, out of the graveyard to your hand. A lot of reasons to sideboard this in certain situations. So great card. Don't forget it's in your sideboard because you might need it. Here next we have another Signet. This time it's Orzhov Signet. Not too much more to say about it. Alright, let's look at some lands, and we have the Esper land. It's Arcane Sanctum. Not a lot to say about it. Comes into play tapped. Great if you're in those colors. Helps you fix. Azorius Guildgate. I was expecting a few more cards that interact with Guildgates. I know there's at least one. Maybe there's another, but I can only think of one off the top of my head, and we'll see it later in the week. But, I mean, that's fine. These are really here just more for fixing again. Alright, another one of the big mythics, Cavern of Souls from Avacyn Restored. Now, unfortunately, this was a rare, and I got to bump up the mythic. I really feel like that wasn't necessary. I feel like this could have been at rare. Price-wise, this was a $55 card when they made the announcement. It's come down a little bit, but now that it's mythic, it's not going to stabilize the price as much as if it was a rare. So I kind of feel like that wasn't necessary. But anyway, it does have new art, and the art looks a little bleak, although I think it would make a good foil, if nothing else. Now, the real question, is this something you want to play in limited? Sometimes. Most of the time, I think this is more of a card that you see in constructed. But if you are up against a deck that has a lot of counter magic, maybe you sideboard this in to make sure you get your one really good bomb out, because you can just name that particular creature type and protect it from counter magic when it comes out. Or if you have a handful of the same creature type, maybe 5 or 6 cards in your deck that are a particular type, you might find some value here. You're not going to run it all the time, though, because you do want to take into account the downside of running this is the fact that if you don't have the creature type that you chose, then it's only colorless mana. And if you're going deep, like maybe even 4 or 5 color good stuff, then this could become an obstacle for you, and you want to be real careful when you're crafting that mana base. So it's not for every deck. I mean, there's not a huge drawback to just running this and just kind of going with it and saying, all right, I can protect a few of my creatures from counter magic and no harm done, especially if you're only in 2 or 3 colors. That's probably a little more plausible, but don't take for granted that you're just going to make this part of your mana base automatically if you're trying to go super deep. Alright, Marsh Flats, the first fetch land. We get 5 fetch lands in the set, of course. They're all the enemy color ones, which were the ones financially that really needed reprinting. However, a little fun fact, if they wanted to put the allied color ones in the set, they actually weren't eligible due to the parameters of the set. They were originally printed in Onslaught, which is before the modern cutoff, so they weren't modern legal, and they were reprinted in Khans of Tarkir, which was too new to be reprinted in Modern Masters 2017. So really, they had no choice. If they wanted to go with fetch lands, they had to go with just these 5. They couldn't go with all 10. Having said that, though, it's a good thing that they did reprint these because financially, again, the demand for those cards was just so high at this point, so it's nice to get more copies out there for players. Not much more I can say about it. I mean, this is a fantastic card. Not only is it a way to fix your mana, but if you're in black and you have ways to return cards from your graveyard back to your hand, then that could even be relevant at times too with a fetch land. Orzhov Guild Gates. Here's the Orzhov colored gate, and yeah, not too much more to say about it. Shimmering Grotto. Nice kind of filter land to have it common just in case you need it. You won't always need it. There's obviously better ways to fix your mana, but in case you need it, it is there for you. And having said that, guess what? Those are the cards for today. So this was a little bit of a longer chapter because we threw in some random artifacts and lands too. But starting tomorrow, we'll continue on with the blue cards and also some of the multicolor cards that coincide, as well as some more lands and artifacts, and we'll do that and work our way through the color pie over the course of the next 4 days. Now, a quick programming note, if you're looking for the Market Watch, I won't be doing that on Saturday like I normally do, but once I wrap this up midweek next week, I will do an episode that focuses on modern singles, especially with all the turbulence right now in that market. So until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.